Okay, so as just to update everyone, we are talking about teaching writing. Okay, we're going to be focusing on the Cambridge exams, particularly B1 and B2. Okay, often known as the PET or the preliminary, and the first or the first certificate. Okay, but these lessons, the lesson plans, the ideas we've got can be adapted, and they don't necessarily need to be for these things. In fact, I think they'll be good for any sort of creative writing or essay writing. Okay?
Yes, and they can be cross exams. I know a lot of people like if they're interested in going into universities, then those are more accepted by the IELTS. And there are a few texts which are common to that in the Cambridge suite.
Yeah, and given that the Cambridge suites give you a range of types of writing, we thought we'd include a lot of those. Okay.
Okay.
So to begin, again, welcome everyone. We thought we'd do a webinar on writing because it is an essential part of these exams, okay, the B1 and B2, okay? But what we really want to do is show you, and so you can show your students how to improve their skills, okay? That is to write for what they're looking for in the exam. And obviously that's what any reader is looking for, okay, when we read something, okay?
Yeah, and I don't know about you, but with writing lessons, I find that I am not particularly enthusiastic to plan them or do them, and students are not usually happy to do some writing themselves. So hopefully this will give you some ideas and make them a bit more enthusiastic and make yourselves a bit more enthusiastic. So we're going to cover some common mistakes that students make in their English writing. Not only generic mistakes, but ones that are particular to Italian learners.
Yeah. We're going to look particularly at essays, articles, and stories today, okay, because these are parts of the B2 exams, the B1 and B2 exams, okay, particularly essay, particularly at B2, but articles and stories at both of them. We will also be focusing a little bit more on the first for schools and the preliminary for schools today, because I imagine those are the exams that your students would be taking if they're still school students. And I'm sure Sean would agree that we would recommend any school-age students to do those exams because they're sort of, the topics are more aimed at things students are interested in, okay, or teenagers are interested in.
Yes, and in this case, what's specific to that is that in the first for schools, you have a story that could pop up on the exam, but that doesn't exist on the B2 first for adults.
Oh, sorry, Sean.
Yeah, that is, as we've said before, that we are going to specifically look at writing for exams, but hopefully you will be able to adapt it to any writing lesson, especially if they are practicing for these genres, for making a story.
Yeah, I mean, writing something for an exam is just good writing. Okay, so the rules here apply for any writing. Okay, so don't think that if they're writing for any other reason that would be any different.
Okay, so let's start with our objectives. So we're hoping that by the end of this session, you'll be more confident in preparing students for writing, which is common to the B1 and B2 genres. We might not address all of them directly, for example, the letter or the email, but we will give you ideas for how to write.
I thought one of the reasons why we wouldn't do that is partly because I think writing for communication, like writing to another person, could maybe even be a topic for a future webinar. Okay, so we'll see, whether we want to do things like writing, talking, messaging to other people using English in this. So I thought let's leave that for another one. Okay.
Yes, there's lots of scope for that. You can do long form in emails and short form in text messages. we will also, okay, Josh.
Yeah, well, so we'll be planning activities for a writing lesson, and particularly looking at the common errors that people can make, okay, at these levels.
Yeah, and something that could directly speak to the motivation and the improvement of students is that we are going to look at ideas for helping students improve their writing through self-correction, but also peer correction, while also taking into account the feelings of students when they are being corrected.
Yeah.
Okay, so let us launch into it.
Okay, I'll just go through a little bit about when we're talking about the B1 exam, okay, that is the Cambridge preliminary B1 for schools. We're looking at two parts, okay? In those, you have to do two parts in 45 minutes in total, okay? The first part is a compulsory email about 100 words. An example is there, okay? These are very readily available on the web, so I'm not going to go through these. These are ones taken from the Cambridge website, so you can find them there. Okay, as I said, we're not going to be focusing on the email today. Maybe at a later date. Okay, but part two, and this is quite new, that you have equal parts in the Cambridge preliminary. This is an updated thing recently. That part two, you have a choice between an article and a story. Okay. About 100 words. So they're of equal weight, and you have to do both part one and part two in 45 minutes. Okay. Similar to the B2, you have a compulsory first part, and then you have a choice of two, or I think you sometimes have three or four, okay, in a B2. Okay. But it's 45 minutes in total, so that would be two parts. Obviously, it's a little bit shorter in the B1 than in the B2. Okay.
And you can see in the part one, it's they give a little more help. They have ideas of how to start your notes, and part of a teacher's job in this case would be to point out that the exam is trying to help you and let students utilize that. But as Josh says, we're going to focus less on this.
And in the B2 first for schools, okay, we have two parts again, but it's actually 80 minutes. That is 1 hour, 20 minutes in total, okay? The first part is a compulsory essay, which needs to be between 140 and 190 words, okay? And it's structured like this. So Sean will be going through this a bit later, particularly with the essay. But as you can see, you have generally a statement or a question. Some parents teach their children at home rather than sending them to school. Is this a good or a bad thing for the children? And then you have notes right about point one, having a parent as a teacher, point two, making friends, and point three, your own ideas. Now, you need to write about point one, point two, and point three, okay, which is your own idea. So it's not a choice. So in part one, the students need to remember that everything, they must write that essay, they must write about those 3 points, okay, in the limited words, okay. I believe if you go over by a few words, it's not going to be a big problem, okay.
Someone's just asked, which book would you recommend? There was Preliminary Goals, which I
the
quite
gold
like.
books are really good. Yeah, I've also got ones that are exam boosters are quite good. Okay, if you look for the preliminary exam booster and the what is it, the first exam booster, they're quite useful. Okay, but to be honest, most of the professional books you can get are really good. Ready for preliminary, ready for first are also quite good ones. Okay, particularly good because they got lots of good examples at the end. The gold and the ready series have examples at the end of all the essays of writing, things like that, with points to help you. Okay.
Yeah.
Anyway, going on, part two is a choice between 4 options. Okay. Now, it's not always clear exactly what you're going to find in those because the options are more than the actual choice is. So you have 4 choices, Okay, here we have a letter, a review, a story, and an essay. Okay, but there can be other things as well. In the first for schools, you have a story. In the normal first, okay, that is the ones that I wouldn't recommend to young people. You could also have a report or a proposal, okay, and sometimes also quite a formal letter, okay.
Okay.
But
So
those we need to be doing both of those in 80 minutes. So again, we'll be looking at really completing this writing in 40 minutes, okay, for the
yes.
B2.
And you can see that they're the same length and they have the same marking weight to them. So there should be equal time.
Yeah, exactly. So it would be really it's not a good idea, even if they think one part's easier than the other, to split them any other way than doing half. Okay.
Okay. So it's a lovely picture with common errors. So can we have some suggestions in the chat? What kind of errors do you tend to find in your students' writing?
Above things like obviously spelling mistakes and grammar mistakes. Okay, now we're going to be expecting a bit of that, but what are the sort of errors that we often find? Okay.
Long sentences is a good one, Ilaria. I think
Very good, exactly. Okay. In fact, while people are doing this, why don't Sean, you put on the first one, and this is something that I really wanted to point out. Okay, a little bit of an example I'm giving here. Okay, is students often write long sentences that just go on and on and on, introducing more and more clauses like this one that just serve to distract the reader until the aforementioned reader forgets what the sentence was trying to say, even if it was an important point, and then just gives up trying to understand the original point. Okay, a bit of a joke there, but I just find that I've never really had to tell students, particularly in their essay, okay, to write longer sentences. Okay, it's generally the other way. English is no offense to Italians, but I think English in a lot of ways has a much tighter sentence structure. We don't have quite as much of the grammar of Italian, and so if you write long sentences with lots of relative clauses, we tend to lose the point and forget what's going on. In Italian, it's actually a bit easier to do this, I know. Okay.
Yes, I've experienced Italian writing, and I thought I wrote long sentences in my essays. I think I was wrong.
Yeah, I'm not saying that you can't do this in Italian. Okay, this is just how when you're writing in English, it's not just a translation. I mean, I've done some translations sometimes from Italian into English, and very commonly I'll divide an Italian sentence into 2 or 3 English sentences. Okay, and so that's basically how it's going to be. Another point is using commas to connect sentences without the supporting grammar. So you might have students say things like, I play football twice a week, comma, my brother plays football too, but he only plays it once a week. Now, that's 2 sentences in English, and you can't really connect them with a comma. Okay. In informal English, you might be able to connect them with a dash. Okay.
Yeah,
but
or semicolon, but
okay.
that's advanced punctuation, I think.
In fact, I would say in general, I tell students to just use full stops and commas. And if there's no reason to put a comma that is not a word like despite or if or although, then I generally tell them to leave it. Okay. Again, these are rules that you can break if you get very good at English and you're very high level. But if you tell these students to follow these rules and try to avoid these errors, then they're going to avoid most of the mistakes. When they get up to advanced, it might be better. Okay, they might have a bit more flexibility. Yeah, it is true that Immaculata just said that punctuation marks are used a little bit differently in Italian than they are in English.
Okay. But let's move on. The next one is a big one. And it's not so much about English use, it's about answering the question itself. So I found in my experience that students don't always address the question. They get distracted, and sometimes this is due to their planning, the fact that they haven't done very much, or just that they're thinking of things even off the top of their heads. They haven't thought about how to answer the question.
Yeah, remember those 3 points in the essay, the 2 points plus the one you need to make up, they all must be in there. Okay, every part of the question about the article must be addressed. Okay.
So the next one, not obeying the word limits. So this is important to point out that if your student has written 300 words instead of 190 words, it probably means that they have strayed from the point a bit, and they're not really concisely addressing the question. So
yeah, I think it's often not appreciated that 190 word limit is actually one of the really important things, that going over it means that you're not really answering the question. Okay. Obviously, as I said, a few words not a problem, but going over significantly is really going to show that you're not really doing what the task is. Okay.
Okay, and then we have not practicing according to the time limits. So go for it. Yeah.
Yeah. So I thought, given that we have the 45 minutes to do the complete 2 activities, I think in B1 it's basically 22 to 23 minutes. Okay. And B2, given that you have 80 minutes, divided into 40. Okay. So remember that is the moment from when they see the exercise for the first time to when they give it to you. Okay. Give it to the examiner, completed and checked. Okay. So really, timing is important there. Okay.
Yes. It's not only the secret to good comedy.
Okay.
So let's look at some others to address.
Yeah, so those ones were ones that we're not going to deal with so much in the rest, okay? Because I think we could do another webinar on this, okay? But planning your time is really important, okay? So as I said before, we can divide that time into 2, and that's how they should do it, okay? Remember that part 1 and part 2 of the exam are worth exactly the same points of the writing exam, okay? And so they should be given the same amount of time. Whether a student's better at one than the other, it doesn't matter, okay?
Okay, so for the B1, the division is like this.
Okay, yeah, so I think a good idea is remember to give them some planning time, okay? So 5 minutes, okay, reading the question, thinking, planning, 15 minutes writing. Remember, it's shorter, obviously, than the B2. Okay, 2 or 3 minutes checking and correcting. Okay, that should give them enough. But remember, those 2 or 3 minutes can really make up a lot of the points you would have missed if you, as someone said, third person S, tenses incorrect. Okay, forgetting plurals. Okay, things like that. Okay, I was doing some writing with some students today, and she submitted it, and it had a lot of these sort of errors that it was clear that she hadn't checked it. Okay.
I think even if you're writing in your mother tongue, if you don't read what you have written, then mistakes are going to creep in, and this is even more so for writing in a second language.
Okay. For B2, I think even a bit more. Okay, 10 minutes. Okay, for planning, reading the question. Okay. Thinking, brainstorming ideas, making a plan. And we're going to have a look in a moment about making a plan, okay? Because this is a part that a lot of students skip, okay? 25 minutes, if you're writing an essay, and to be honest, a lot of the other parts too, it gives you about 5 minutes per paragraph, okay? Given that you're probably going to write 5 paragraphs. If you're doing 4, obviously, you could even spend a bit more time on each paragraph. Okay, 5 minutes for checking and correcting, given that it's a bit longer. Okay, if you can get them, even doing this in class. Okay, getting them, to after 10 minutes, say, okay, now start writing. Don't let anyone start writing before that 10 minutes, okay? And then, okay, make sure you give them, every 5 minutes, say, are you on your next paragraph, okay? And then 5 minutes before the end, or 35 minutes, say, pens down, or, start checking, okay?
I would say also, whether they've done it at home or in class, don't accept writing unless you say, have you read it? Have you checked it? Will I find silly errors in this? And if you give it a quick scan and say, no, you're better than this, then you give it back. It might be a bit cruel for some, but it could be a good way to just get them thinking, okay, everything I've written, I have to read it back. I have to check it.
Yeah, I think, just giving it back to them and saying that, then it's going to show them how many, okay? Or even, if they think that it's correct, just go and underline the errors and send it back to them and say, these are things you made. A lot of them will be just distraction errors, forgetting S, okay? Whether it's third person, whether it's plural, okay? Someone asked before, all this material again will be in the handout, including this page, okay? Making a writing plan, okay? So you will have this, okay? The key is to think about the question well and making a plan, okay? Again, if you can give them a handout like this, doesn't really matter what writing they're doing, okay? It means that they get in the habit of planning, okay? If they don't do this, then they can't start, okay? And they've got to do it well, okay? So the first 5 minutes in B1 or 10 minutes in B2 should be dedicated to reading the question, okay? Thinking about it, making a plan, okay?
There have been so many good pieces of writing I've seen, but I have to mark them down because they don't address the question.
Okay. They're not the key to particularly an essay, but even something like a story is organizing it, okay? I mean, we're not expecting them to be great writers, and to be honest, even great writers will make a plan, and if they don't make a plan, then they spend a lot of time editing it. They're not going to have the same amount of time to edit it, okay? So making a plan is the best use of your time. Some things to consider, and that I put it on the top of here, is the formality, okay? You're going to be semi-formal if you're writing an essay, and an email or a letter, that is an email or a letter to an unknown person, okay? Semi-informal for a review article or a story, okay? And informal for a email or letter to a friend. Now, in the writing plan, I've got some of the characteristics of those. I don't think we've got a lot of time to go through them, but I think you probably have some idea. Obviously, a lot of that is about vocabulary, but it's also about the sort of sentence structures, the abbreviations and contracted forms you can use, okay? How many paragraphs, okay? So no writing should have fewer than 3 paragraphs, okay? Or more than 5. And to be honest, I think that's true for B1 or B2, okay? What will it contain, okay? Therefore, you're going to have an introduction, okay? In a story, it's not so much an introduction, but it'll be the background, okay? And it's the end of an essay, it'll have a conclusion, okay?
Okay. So we're going to move on now to a specific genre, writing a story. Go ahead, Josh.
Okay. Yeah, the story option in B1 and B2, remember this is talking particularly about the first for schools, the schools suite, okay? Always give some idea how to start it. The most common ones are things like they give you a title, for example, The Luckiest Day of My Life. They might give you the first line. When I opened the letter, I couldn't believe my eyes. Or the last line, maybe even just part of the last line. And that's how I became a millionaire. This is to give them a bit of a prompt, okay? So that the examiners are obviously comparing, as we say in English, apples with apples, not apples with pears, okay? In addition, when you have the first B1 for schools, it often gives you, it always gives you 2 elements that your story must include. Might include a meeting, might include a stranger, might even have an object, a phone, or a message. Okay. Again, that's to give the students a bit of guidance. Okay, it's not a natural thing that a writer is required to write a story in 23 minutes or 40 minutes. So they're giving you a bit of help there. Okay. Even if the question doesn't give you a title, you should have one. Okay, and this is true also for the article and the review. Okay, don't accept stories, articles, or reviews without a title. Okay. Again,
Yes,
it may
this is
even be
another-
the luckiest day of my life. That's fine as a title. Forget about thinking up a better title. Okay. But it's you never. If I buy a book by Charles Dickens, I can guarantee it's got a title. Okay.
Yes, and this is another habit forming thing that you just have a look at it quickly. Okay, there's no title. Quickly, just scribble one. It's enough. Okay, so what's your examiners looking for in a story?
Okay, the key thing they're often looking for is narrative tenses. Now, if people can write in the chat now, what are the three, sometimes considered four, but what are the three main tenses that are considered narrative tenses? Okay. These are what tenses?
Past continuous.
Past continuous is one of them. Yep, certainly. Okay.
Past perfect. That's the
past
second
perfect.
One.
Yep.
And past simple.
Past simple. Yeah. Okay. That's the
three.
three. Okay. So past simple we generally use for important events. Okay. Now remember that if I'm teaching a elementary student or maybe pre-intermediate, I would expect them to tell me about their weekend, starting from when they woke up to when they went to bed, and every action with the time. Okay. But that's not a story. That's just what they did at the weekend. So that could be done with past simple. But when you have a story, you want some past continuous for background actions or longer actions that are interrupted. While I was walking down the street, okay, I heard a siren. Okay. I turned around and there was an ambulance heading towards me. Okay. That's how you tell a story. Okay. And then we have past perfect for things that you just remembered, flashbacks, revealing surprises, things that happened before other events in the story. Not because you forgot to tell them in the story, but because they didn't happen to you. They happened somewhere else, to another person. Okay, you weren't aware of them. Okay, those things you need to put them in. I think that's sort of in the order of importance too. Past simple are probably going to be most of your verbs. Okay, past continuous occasionally, past perfect maybe once or twice in a story. Okay, you don't need too much, because if you're using it too much, probably means you've told the story in the wrong order. Okay?
Yes, and be careful of trying to shoehorn it in. Have a reason for it to being around.
Yeah, often things like, I remembered that, I realized that is going to introduce a past perfect. Time expressions. Now, it's obvious that we're going to have time expressions. Most stories, and particularly you need to pay attention to the example they might give you at the beginning in the question. When I woke up, I realized that. Okay, that indicates that you're generally going to have a story told in the past simple. Okay, in the most things. So therefore, you need some expressions and a variety of them. As someone said before, we need sort of synonyms, similar words. You don't want to repeat anything, okay, too many times. Or, I tell my students, only repeat for emphasis. Okay, don't repeat by accident. Okay, so a lot of these. Okay, adverbs, things like suddenly, immediately, unfortunately. Okay, in the handout, I've got a lot of links to good websites that'll give you lists of those. Okay, so you can find a lot of these things that you can even give lists of these to students, and they've got to tick them off when they put them in the story. Okay,
One that
not too many of them.
If I read it, and I see the word gradually, I'm immediately thinking better about this piece of writing. So if someone is able to use it correctly, that's something that an examiner might sit up and take notice about.
Okay. And again, trying to use some more extreme adjectives. we're trying to make a story interesting. So if I just talk about, a man arrived in a big car, or to be honest, a man arrived in a car. No one arrives in a car. They arrive in a big green car, a small blue car, a fast sports car. These sort of things make it more, how can I say, easy to imagine. Okay, and they're also more interesting. Students at A1 level, A2 level will know big, but they might not know huge. Okay, food can be good, but it can also be delicious, fantastic, or amazing. Okay, and again, obviously, a person might be fantastic at sports. Okay, whereas they can't be delicious. Okay, so using these adjectives can make the thing come alive. Not lists of adjectives, and not necessarily every noun with an adjective, but whenever you want something to be visualized, try to get them to use an adjective. And so try to underline uses of just, things like good or big or tall. Okay.
I'm going to jump forwards.
Okay.
So this is something that you're going to see in the handouts, the idea of an emoji story. Explain.
Yeah, so I've attached this. There's some emojis here. This is not my original idea, I must point out. But why don't we get them involved? Okay, remember that a lot of students in the end, and a lot of us, are telling stories in our messages, okay, and even in the chat now, okay, with emojis. So they're a bit of something that we bring with us already. Now, instead of translating their experiences into emojis, why don't we go the other way and give them some emojis and do the other way? Again, this is not something that they're going to ask you in the exam, but it's good training. Okay, I've provided 4 examples there, but remember, you could always give the students some. If you want to get these on Word, obviously you can do them in messages, but it might be a bit difficult to transfer it onto pages that you can print. Okay, but if you use the Windows key, this is if you've got a Windows computer. Okay, I'm not sure about Apple. You just press the Windows key plus full stop. Okay, and it will bring up a dialog box with a lot of emojis that you can choose. Pretty much all of the standard ones. Okay. 5 emojis, I think, should be enough for a story of B1 or B2. Okay, if you want to do 4 or more, fine. Okay. I've also divided this worksheet into 3 parts, and again, this is sort of similar to the essay: a short introduction, a main body, and a short conclusion. Okay. Basically, it's not so much an introduction as the setting. Okay, it tells you the first part should tell me where you were, what you were doing. Okay, so in this, for example, in number 1 of here, we have an alarm clock. I imagine that probably means I was in bed when the alarm rang. Okay, or I looked at the time and I realized I had to get to school. Okay, I hopped on my scooter. Okay, then we have the main body. What happened? What happened then? Again, this is generally told in past simple, but with a few past continuouses thrown in, maybe a past perfect occasionally. Okay. Again, this doesn't necessarily need to be 1 paragraph. You can divide it into 2. Think about in a film, where would the scene change, or a TV series? Okay, something happens at your home. The next paragraph as soon as you hop on your scooter or in the car, okay? Or when you arrive at school, and some sort of conclusion. Okay? Obviously, it's a very short story, so thinking always about how it's going to end. Again, making a plan. Remember that plan from the previous slides was also applicable here.
Yeah, and of course they can finish it when there's a sudden change to keep the audience in suspense. We call it a cliffhanger.
Yeah.
Okay, and then
I'll go through this pretty quickly because I think I'm taking up a lot of
yeah, I've just pointed out that we only have a very short time left.
What we've got to do when we write an article is grab the reader's interest and hold it to the end. Okay, so usually, as you can see by the article on the left, they usually give you a lot of the questions, the details that are in there, and they're usually in an appropriate order. Usually the most important questions first, followed by some sort of, well, let's say the essential questions first, followed by some more emotional, your reaction, your feeling, okay? Do you want to go on, Sean? Okay.
Yeah,
What you can do, I often say, is the first paragraph is to introduce the topic. Now, I wouldn't start saying, who my closest friend is. I'd probably start writing about friendship, why it's important, and then end with something like, and that's why I think my best friend is this person. Okay. Now, start to answer the first questions. The first questions are probably going to be some sort of objective facts: where, when, how long. Okay. And then more emotional aspects in the next paragraph. Okay? These, again, will be the question in there, but these are sort of things where you can digress a bit, give some examples. Okay? And then a conclusion, which sort of thinking about an article is generally going to be set in the past because it's probably going to be talking about your experiences. Okay? Not always. Sometimes they talk about ideal things. Why not move on to the future? Okay? This is why I hope to stay friends forever, or I'm really looking forward to, spending next summer. Okay. Not only because it's a logical order from the past to the future or from the past to the present, but also because it allows you to use some tenses that you haven't previously.
Okay, so there are a few ways we can grab the reader's attention.
Again, these are all in the handout. So you can ask the reader some rhetorical questions, okay, to get their attention. Have you ever, etc. Similar, you can use exciting language, which are like imperatives, okay, just imagine, just think, or conditionals, if you've ever, I think. And again, not so, again, in a similar way to telling a story, you can use these adverbs because in the end, an article is often telling a story about your life, your experiences.
Okay.
You can also use these, give them these topics, a topic, and then give them some of these expressions to put in there. Okay, they could even just make some sentences. Okay, so you could give them a whole lot of topics and see how you could use each of these expressions to write a sentence. Okay. Anyway, I think I'm handing over to Sean now to talk about it.
Yeah. So I have also noticed the time, so I'm going to try to go through this quite simply, but also quite fast. So one of the reasons why the essay might be a bit more difficult for your students is that while it is a big part of an English education, it's not always in the educational system of other countries like Italy, and I think similarly in Spain. So learners can often be unfamiliar with it. So the things that an essay usually includes, obviously comparisons, but there are many other things. There's an introduction, of course, a conclusion, passive structures, a neutral voice. They need to use full words. They don't say, they can't say don't, they must say do not. And there should be a logical organization divided into paragraphs, which in this case, I would suggest between 3 and 5. Introduction and conclusion, always 2. But there are 3 ideas in the B2, for example. So it might be the most logical to give those ideas their own paragraph.
Yeah, at least I would say, if not 1 paragraph each, 2 may go together, but I don't think you can do 3 in 1 paragraph.
Yeah. Okay. So one of the ways I was thinking of making writing an essay at least a little engaging for students is to have a debate in a first class and then write about what you debated, either at home or in a second class. So I'll just go through the procedure for how I would see this going. So you would adapt an exam question, which is essentially where your plan is going to come from. It's a summary of both sides of the debate, organized into paragraphs. and students either write the essay for homework, as I said, or you can dedicate a second class to it.
A great way to integrate this with speaking as well. You know, we did another one on teaching speaking, another webinar on teaching speaking, and you know, here obviously debating is going to help you with part 3 of the B2 exam, of the speaking exam.
And so I've chosen one which is definitely going to get teenagers talking. Teenagers are too young to teach other people about anything. Do you agree? And I'm sure that every teenager will feel immediately a little bit insulted about this. So hopefully you can get people talking about that. So first you would start with a warmer discussion, giving their true opinions of it. And then I would divide the class equally into agree and disagree sides. I have found this is effective even if students don't hold the view that they are arguing. They tend to they tend to take the side when they are preparing to debate and take the argument. It's good practice for writing because you have to present both sides neutrally. And then students work in pairs to think of points in favour, if they are in favour, or against that side. So I do have a bit of write a short idea in chat, but I'm going to jump ahead, I'm afraid. So then the actual debate happens. You reorganize the group so you have 2 or more people arguing each side in the group. So you have a few mini debates. You can do it as a whole class, but I found that people get more opportunity to speak if they have smaller groups. And then with the whole class, what points were made for each side? I would summarize these on the whiteboard. Okay, so this might be something that that they came up with. So there are some points to agree with in the form of technology, and at least 1 point to agree with or disagree with in the environment. We're not dealing at the moment with the third idea because that's what's going to come next. Okay, thanks. So students go back to their original pairs and then they together would brainstorm a third idea. They should try to come up with as many ideas as possible. If they do struggle, try to prompt them with ideas of your own or some visual cues. So for the essay, I've thought that things that could fit well with the topic. The question is, are teenagers able to teach other people? So you could talk about life experience. You could talk about education. So on the one hand, students have not finished their education, or teenagers have not finished their education, but they are more likely to remember parts from their education because they're being educated right now. Health, physical and mental, their openness to new ideas, their familiarity with entertainment and so on, and of course motivation. So there could be many other things, but I'm afraid I'm going to...
Well, feel free to keep adding them in the chat so other people can see anyway.
Yeah. Okay, so after all of this, hopefully you have enough for choice that students can choose a third idea that they like and have something to say about. And they as a bit of preparation, think of 1 or 2 arguments agreeing and disagreeing with the original question. So now they are still not ready to write the essay, but they are ready to write a plan of the essay using Josh's lovely template. One thing they could do as a bit of practice is write a sentence for each point they're going to mention that is accurate and shows a good range of vocabulary or grammar. So here are some ideas that I came up with. And you could use these as sort of prompts to show what kind of thing you are talking about when you're saying a good range of vocabulary, good range of grammar. And when you've reviewed the plans, students are ready to write their essays. Hopefully the debate structure has given them a number of ideas and got them enthusiastic and invested in it. And it's good to know, Edward, that you are already doing these in classes. Okay, so To move on to correction, this is a very, very important part of writing, but it sometimes is effective and sometimes isn't. I've done this in two ways. I've often corrected the most glaring errors and just pointed out other ones that other students have done, or I've completely corrected it or completely left it to them. So another way you can do it is to have students correct their own errors or the errors of their peers. How do you do this? Again, I'm hoping this is not an entirely new idea, but you would have a correction code. So on the next slide, I have a suggested correction code, and I'm going to ask what each symbol means. So SP at the beginning, what do you think SP stands for? Perfect. Well done.
Yes.
Yes. Okay. T. Oh, lovely. You are on fire. Okay. So P. Lovely. Okay. There's an apostrophe missing in Steven Spielberg. Okay. The little arrow pointing up. Okay, here's an example. Yes, well done.
Okay. Missing, yep.
Missing words. Gr.
Grammar, yep.
Yes, the two ticks. Yes, or it's not only good but very good. So in that case, it's just giving the students a bit of motivation and showing that because they see the writing completely covered in red, some of that red is giving them a little bit.
Yeah, I think that's really important. That you don't want them to come away with something with all the errors there without a bit of praise for the things that they actually did correctly too. Yes. Or did well.
Okay. What about WW? Wrong word. Lovely. Okay. He made me a favor. A typical one. L. I like that language.
Language. If they start writing in another language, Chinese words, could be an error.
Does that help? Linker.
Ah, linker word. Okay, a word that connects them. Okay.
Yeah. Okay. I think there was someone who mentioned that linkers are not always used by students, so this could be a bit of a reminder that this could have been an opportunity for a linker.
Yeah. Who told me?
Yeah. Okay. I don't remember AG. Okay, this is about subject-verb agreements.
Ah, okay.
Food is singular. It needs is. Okay, hopefully, smiley face. Well done. Okay. I like the word prolific, and this is something I have called. You said interesting vocabulary. I've said this is a wow word.
Oh no.
You look at it, you go wow. Okay. And directly addressing nice is a bit boring, so maybe you could replace it with a wow word.
Yeah.
So there you go. And the two lines, the two sliding lines, what do you think they could be? Not split sentence, but you're thinking along the right lines. Okay, it's very hard to demonstrate this. I was thinking, make a new paragraph. So often students change the subject without thinking about how to show that they've changed the subject. This could be a nice way to say, okay, you could start a new paragraph there.
Mm.
Okay, so I realize I'm over time. So that is just a suggestion. It does appear on the handout. The thing about correction code is that every student needs to know it. I've seen it on posters in certain classrooms. I've made posters myself. I've given this as a handout just for them to paste in their books to show this is what it means. Okay. Another way is to get them using the code on their own writing or other students' writing. Again, make sure that students understand that they should be kind as well as cruel. Yes. So the 2 ticks and the wow word symbol, make sure that those are used. And when students receive their writing back, they correct the mistakes the partners have identified. And as I've said, you do have to monitor this quite closely, because sometimes students might look at something and they think it's wrong, but it isn't. It's actually a wow word, for example, but they don't understand it. So I would say that you need to make sure that that students are doing this in as constructive a way as possible. So I wouldn't do it for the first time that that you introduce the code, but once they understand what it is, then they can have a go at correcting each other. Okay, so our conclusions.
I think practice is the key. That I mean, I've got students who write very good essays now, but were not very good at all in the first time. Okay, even more than speaking and some other skills, writing really improves time to time. Okay, if they're not improving every essay, okay, then you really need to give them a bit more guidance, a few more models, because every error should be a chance to not make that error in the next one.
Yeah. Students also, if they've done a good piece of writing, then you should let them know that they should look at that and see what went right and try to reuse parts of that in the next piece of writing that they do. They should always try to learn from what they've done, both in terms of mistakes and in terms of success.
Yeah, I think like a lot of these things are introductions and conclusions. The topic changes, but the structure and almost the sentences almost stay the same, Don't always set these writing for homework, okay? I mean, it often is, it's not a great use of your time if they're doing a lot of writing all the time in class, but it can actually give them the time, that they're all spending this time, okay, rather than the conscientious students spending more time and the lazy students not so much, okay?
And you can provide a bit of help for people who you see are struggling. So it can be in real time you're helping them out. Also, we've said this a lot, and we've provided worksheets to help address this directly, but planning is essential. Even if students complain, I think that they will see the results.
Yeah, I think anything disorganized is basically because it hasn't been planned or hasn't been planned well.
Okay.
So think of ways, that we can generate this interest. To sit someone down with a, say, write a story. First of all, it's not really matching the exam conditions, okay? And second of all, it's just, not everyone's born to be a writer, okay? That's why they give you a bit of help, okay? And so debates, competitions, things like this, an X factor sort of thing. Each person has to give a vote on the other person's, okay? Can be really fun. Yeah, obviously, non-competitive, not, how can I say, you don't want to offend people who maybe are avant-garde writers.
For really young classes, I've seen people write on different things just to make it interesting. So we're writing task written on a balloon in pen, and having paper on the walls so that people can just write on that. But that's not so much for B1 and B2. It's just a way to jazz up the act of writing. And of course, students should be exposed to as many models of the different genres of writing as possible, because how are they going to know how to write something if they don't know what the end product looks like?
Plenty of websites in the handout, and as I said before, the gold series of books and the ready for series also have lots of examples. But to be honest, I think any book that is specifically for B1 or B2 Cambridge will have it in there. Okay?
And yes, you are going to receive a certificate of attendance. If you don't, then email, was it Formazione at
I think it's on the next slide. Okay. Okay. Anyway, on the next one.
Hang on. There we go. Yes.
Yeah, please email that. I just want to announce that in 2 weeks we'll have a webinar on using Banksy, okay, the graffiti artist, in the classroom. It won't. I'll be here and I'll introduce it, but it will be done by our MLA blogger Francesca, and she'll be conducting it in Italian. It does have some things in about literature and accompanying worksheet, so I think you'll find it really good, and I really hope you come in for that one. Yeah. Thanks, everyone.
Time, apologies that we ran over time a bit, but
yeah, sorry for the time. It's okay. I think it's my fault. Okay.
Yes.
Okay. Thanks, everyone. Okay. See you next time. Okay. Bye.
Next time, and goodbye.
Now they know that they can actually tell a story with a surprise in it, let's say, okay, or a flashback in it. Okay. Another thing I want to do in the chat. Okay, so I've got some uses. So expressing regrets. Okay, talking about daily routines, describing the differences between two cities, and inviting someone to an event. Okay, and I want you to match these. Okay, so A, which one would A go with? Which one would you use would like? Yes, okay, we've got a few people saying 4. I think that would be the grammar that, obviously there's other ways of doing this, but if you need someone to invite someone to an event, okay, would like would be a perfect solution to this, okay?
How about present simple?
Present simple, what is present simple the solution for, okay? Yeah, talking about daily routines, okay?
Yes, yeah. Comparatives?
3, yep, okay.
Yeah, perfect, okay.
And
finally,
wish in the past perfect would obviously be there, okay, to express regrets, okay. Now, that's not a big surprise, but what I'm really trying to emphasize here is instead of starting with would like or the present simple, the structures, we're going to start with those ones in the numbers, okay, and then provide the structure as the solution, okay. Obviously, even better, for example, A, you could also provide a variety of ways to invite someone to an event, okay? So here's an example, okay? Here we have Kate, okay? Where is she? Okay, we need to think about that, okay? I'll keep going, but feel free to put this in the chat, okay?
Yes, answer the questions as we go.
Okay. How does she feel? Okay, she's in the rain, she's under the rain. In English, we'd probably a bit more natural to say she's in the rain, okay? How does she feel, okay? And why does she feel this way, okay? Did she take an umbrella with her? And the most important thing is, what do we think of her actions? Why, okay? How do we feel, okay? So, okay, thank you, Sylvia. We have, she feels sad because it's raining and she's getting wet, okay? So regarding the umbrella, regarding the situation she's in, what could we say about her, okay? What could we say about her actions that led her to this point, okay? She wishes she had taken an umbrella, good. How could we express something about a mistake, okay? She's going to take a taxi, maybe do, okay?
She's left it at home,
okay? So what you could say is that maybe she should have taken an umbrella, okay? Or she shouldn't have gone out without an umbrella, okay? So this could be a way, obviously we've gone through it in like 1 minute, okay? But this might take 5 minutes. It would work a lot better if we had time to listen to everyone's spoken responses. But if we lead the students there with these questions, then we provide them with a solution. She should have taken an umbrella, without necessarily describing the grammar. By putting that grammar there, by putting those sentences there, the students will probably work out what it means. Okay? And therefore later, certainly we can talk in more detail about it. One thing, this book, I don't know if anyone's seen this book, but Making Sense of Phrasal Verbs is a great book that teaches phrasal verbs in this way. Okay, I've given you an example there. So we have breakdown. Okay, won't have time to go through these, but I think we do have a link to the name of the book and things like this in the handout. And basically it leads you to these. It gives you a solution, a problem or a situation, a problem, and then basically leads you to use this phrasal verb in an appropriate way. Okay? Now, this is presenting vocabulary in this way, but it could be very easily adapted to other things like for or since, okay, wish, even in about present desires or about past regrets, comparatives, or even past perfect to talk about two events in the past. Okay? Other things that are always useful, and again, these are things you're probably already doing. Okay, so you are probably already teaching situationally, but it always helps to be a bit more conscious of what you're doing. Timelines are really useful. If you can draw timelines and you're presenting something visually, okay, it means that the student gets a visual idea of what's going on. Right? Stick figures or cartoons, okay, showing this. If we talk about what the situation is, then it's going to lead that student to it. I'm sure when you teach comparatives, we talk about objects, we talk about cities, we talk about family members. Okay, these are ways of if you're talking about the differences between those two toy cars, it's going to be very difficult to really give a good description without using a comparative. And obviously things like mimes, okay, acting. Remember, not just you as a teacher, but also the students can be doing this. Okay.
Okay, lovely. And we'll talk about when to use the situational approach as well. So
yeah, so when would we use it? Okay, it can be really useful when you have mixed level classes, or when some students might be stronger than others, which basically all classes. Okay, and so some of them might know it. Okay, it can be useful when they seem to understand the language. Okay, but they don't necessarily use it except in the exercises you're doing. Okay? It's really good when a situation is clear, okay, and the target language is clearly the best solution. So things like should, just to go back to that example, it would be very hard to give descriptions of a city or ideas of what to do in a city without things like should, must, you'd better, okay, things like this. Okay. These are other grammatical structures that just came off the top of my head. Okay, things like should in the present and in the past, present perfect simple, present perfect continuous for durational forms, that is with for and since, past continuous, future continuous. Okay, if they understand present continuous, you could build on that knowledge, okay, and talk about it in the future or past continuous, and also this present perfect for past actions with present results. Okay, like he has broken his leg. Okay.
Yes, the idea is to think of a situation where a student needs this piece of grammar to complete the task.
Exactly. I think if we're just telling them, now fill out these exercises with should and shouldn't, you're not really preparing them for life in the world where they're actually going to be using it. Okay. Anyway, at this stage, I think I'll hand over to Sean for a bit, and he's going to present some other ideas.
Okay, so I'm going to go a bit back to structures of meaning and form, and a way to perhaps make it a little more digestible for our students. So Like an English file, and I believe many other course books, there is a grammar section at the back of the book. Traditionally, on the left, you have the rules. On the right, you have exercises that prove you can use the rules, which is, that's perfectly fine. I have no problem with that. But I don't know if you have noticed this, but it's really, the rules can be quite dense and they can be quite difficult to understand unless you have the time to read through them, and the students don't even look at them. So how do we get the rules into the student's head and not just on the page? We can use guided discovery, which is any activity which guide learners to discover rules or patterns in the language. So you start with the language and you guide students towards the rules. This works, I think, because it requires some thought and it requires some working out from the students, not just a direct explanation from the teacher. And the end result would be that the student remembers what they learned because they had to do something cognitively themselves rather than being told it and just tuning out and looking out of the window. Here's an example. So on the left, you can see a text with my typical weekend. I'll leave it up. I'm not going to read it out. But this is what's called an inductive approach. This is any approach where you start with the text and the students discover the rules for themselves. Now, what grammar point do you think I'm using this text for? Write it in the chat. Okay, we've got present simple. That's close, but not right. Routines. What do we need for routines? Arminia. Your second part is exactly right. It's these things, adverbs of frequency. Okay, and the way that guided discovery would work is that you're going to see some rules now, but they are incomplete. So first of all, always is A, a verb, B, a noun, C, an adjective, or D, an adverb. I hope that everybody goes for D, because that's what it is. And so we established that always is an adverb, and then you can get adverbs of frequency and adverbs of manner. Of course, you would then try to guide them towards, yes, it is adverb of frequency. Words similar to always are adverbs of frequency. Read the text again, find more adverbs of frequency and underline them in the text. This is what the student would do. And on the previous slide, I highlighted them all, so hopefully everybody can see those. Okay, so this is what you would present the student with, and you wouldn't have to explain as much. And
by the way, obviously these texts are in the handout. See, and the
yes, all of the text that I show you. There's also a lesson plan in the handout, so hopefully you'll be able to use that almost immediately. And this is something that you do see in course books a lot, and I think it's quite useful. So that's a fairly simple guided discovery exercise. What I want to move on to now, oh, there's still more. This goes into the form. So here it was the meaning. This one is the form. So in that case, you just have a number of examples, and you have to say, does the adverb of frequency go before sleep, or does it go after? Hopefully, the student looks and goes, it is, it's before, and they circle. Okay, so this is it's just asking the students to complete the rules, and in this case, hopefully they remember it and they use it more often.
Yeah, I think this is like a really useful way to, the more you're doing this is as much as you can get students to discover things themselves, I think it really means they're going to remember it, okay, rather than they're getting bombarded by information from many different sources.
Now, I feel that we do have a lot to get through, so it does say write your thoughts in the chat, but I'm going to jump ahead and go. So I think there are a number of advantages of using this approach. If you're the teacher and you've created the worksheet, first of all, your voice is saved. You don't have to explain the grammar so much yourself. You are also free to move around the classroom and help students who are weaker and don't quite get the grammar. And you can answer questions while you are monitoring, while you are in the classroom rather than in front of the classroom. For the students, again, hopefully it's more stimulating. It's more of a step-by-step approach, and students can work at their own speeds. And there's something that I really like to see is that students can help each other. And finally, hopefully it sticks in their head more. They only have to learn it once or twice rather than have to repeat it about 5 times. Okay, so to move on from guiding discovery to something a little more, a little less targeted, noticing activities. So when you learn a new word in a foreign language, it can be English, it can be any other language, what happened when you learned a new word that you thought was strange or that you didn't know before? Hopefully what happened was this: you kept hearing the word all of the time. I'm trying to think of an example of this that happened in my that happened in my learning. Probably izquierda, because I noticed that in Spanish, and it means left, and I knew left was sinister in Italian, but izquierda was really different, and so then suddenly I started hearing it everywhere. But that's an illusion. The word was around before in the same frequency. Noticing is when you've actually learned the word and you are able to use it properly. And it's a really good thing. So how do we promote noticing in our students? One thing, in designing a noticing activity, you should make sure the learner is able to pay attention to new words, and the learner needs to notice the gap between native speaker input, a text, a video, a listening, and what students can do, their own output. So there are a couple of ways. Here's 2 examples. One is deconstruction, then reconstruction of a text. So find a short, interesting text, then take it apart, reduce it to simple sentences, each with only one piece of information. Then give the students the deconstructed text, and students have to make it again. Then you bring back the original text and compare it with the students, and the things that are different are the things that students notice. And because they've just reconstructed the text, they know more or less what it means. So here is an example. Again, I'm going to have to go a bit fast with this, but these are the simple sentences. There's only one item of information in each sentence. And here is the original text. So
and don't worry, this will be all in the handout. So
yeah,
just want to present a lot of information. Obviously, this would take quite a while if you're doing it in the classroom. Okay, but we want to give you a lot of different ideas. Okay.
Yeah, and there are some quite interesting little things. So on arrival at, I don't think that students would spontaneously come up with that when they're reconstructing it. The mayor was heard to say, on condition that. So it's got a few that I think are worth this teaching. and you'll be able to discuss this. So you can see, what does do so mean? And then you can talk with your students about it. And hopefully this will again make it a bit more memorable, make students notice. Okay, another thing that could be quite fun. I don't have an example for this because it's a long time since I used it, but so for two-way translation, you have to find 2 or even more authentic texts in English that are appropriate for the level. Then students work in pairs and groups. They translate the text into Italian, so it should be a short text. Then you give the Italian text to a different group and they retranslate it back into English. So then you can see how it changed from original to Italian to English. And again, you're going to notice the gap. You're going to see what went missing and what transformed. And you should be able to find some interesting things to talk about when you put the different
Yeah, I
versions
think this
together.
is a really interesting way. I mean, I'm sure we all do translations from English into the other language, but translating it back really shows how it can change, and things that have been simplified into Italian now become simplified back into English, and that can be a way of identifying, you know, what they know, what they don't know, and some great things that you can actually point out to them about the original text.
Yeah, and you can see how a native speaker expresses themselves in a language as opposed to a learner express themselves in the language, and hopefully there will be a bridging of the gap. They will be able to do this later. Okay, and this one, I'm not entirely sure about it because I think Google Translator's got really good these days. But another way to do it is get the translation from Google Translate. So I don't know if you've done this, but when you translate from Italian to English or English to Italian, it gets a bit weird. There are lots of literal translations which don't make sense. And then you try to translate it back into English. So you can do this either way, translate the text from Italian to English or translate from English to Italian. Here's a quick example of what I mean. I am not good enough at Italian to notice the mistakes here, but I gather it's pretty accurate.
Yeah, I believe there's a few mistakes there, but in general, what we've done is really sort of simplified it. If you can see, for example, how we can use summering as a verb, okay? And then in the third line in the English, we have hoof it down, okay? You know, these are sort of expressions that have been simplified, although they have been done quite well by the Google Translate. There's other parts in there that I'm sure you'll see that are really not what you'd say in Italian, okay? And these are things that are, you know, obviously it's a machine translation, but I'm sure students would also make some mistakes because they didn't understand the context. Okay?
Yeah, and of course there's something I've noticed in that I see a lot of, the equivalent would be present perfect, whereas the English uses past simple. So you can use these kind of translations to point out how English works differently to Italian.
Yeah, exactly. Because a past simple or a present perfect will often go into the passato prossimo, okay, in Italian, and but bringing it back into English, you need to make that judgment which way it goes back into. Okay?
Because they work slightly differently. Okay, so as I said, there's a number of things that noticing activity can do, but it's not quite as specialized as something like a situational approach or guided discovery. And they can be used to demonstrate what learners are missing, and they can, and I like that bringing translation, the original language, back into class in a very controllable way. I think I enjoy that because I think that it can be useful to use the student's mother tongue in a classroom.
I think it can be good in the sense that you might even surprise them. They're quite used to translating something into Italian. Now surprise them and say, okay, now you've done that. Now swap it and translate it back into English. Okay, and that'll surprise them and it'll get them doing really using a different part of their brain, let's say, different muscles.
Yes. Okay, so here is, what did that do? Okay, here is what I call an ARC lesson. So what does ARC stand for? First of all, has this ever happened to you? You say to a class, today we're learning about the present perfect. And the students say, teacher, we know the present perfect. The thing is, you know that they don't use it. They may have had lessons in something like the present perfect or modal verbs or the past simple, but you have noticed that they aren't using it. So how can we actually get them using the grammar that we are teaching? So Josh has already talked about the situational approach, and I've talked about guided discovery. Here's a way to mesh them all together. So ARC, A is authentic use, R is restricted use, and C is clarification. And these are for the different stages of the lesson. It's a form of test, teach, test, but it's a bit more formalized. So here's the start of a lesson that I did about 4 years ago. I think, yes, you can write in the chat. So I'm in the UK at the moment, and I'm thinking of maybe in the spring or the summer that I should go to Italy. Do you have any advice on where to go in Italy? In full sentences, write in the chat where to go and what to do. Any advice for me?
Venice sounds lovely. Yeah.
Nice. Yeah. I've been to Venice. I absolutely loved it, and I would love to return. In February there's Carnivale, which is fantastic in Venice.
Mm.
Any other suggestions?
Bologna.
Very good. Okay, I can see lots of little bits of grammar trying to go in. Sicily. I would love to go to Florence, Serbia. That's one of the places I haven't been. Positano.
Positano. Yep.
I've never heard of Positano. Tell me about Positano.
Positano is the one on the top right, I believe. It looks like it anyway. Okay.
Okay. I'm sorry. This was a Google image search. I don't think I fully absorbed everything.
Not too far from where I am. It's about 2 hour and a half, 2 hours from Naples, where I am.
That was it. I googled the Amalfi Coast. Okay. So, however, when I go, I'm also aware that tourists can be quite annoying and embarrassing for people. So can you think of any rules for how to behave when I'm on holiday in Italy? I'm thinking of laws, of course, but also etiquette and customs. Any rules that you think I can follow? Okay, I'm going to move on a little bit, but
Okay, yeah.
Nice.
Don't talk with your hands in your pockets. Okay.
Yes, I think as a teacher, I'm quite good with that as well.
Okay, here they are. There's a bit of delay.
There we go. Okay, very good.
Speak slowly. Yep. Okay.
Yeah.
Don't take photos where it's forbidden. Yep. Don't take photos around military bases or things like this.
Yes, I think that was in an art gallery. They're usually saying no photos. Okay, Thank you, everybody. Before we move on, I wouldn't ask this of my students, but what do you think is the grammar point that I'm trying to elicit? Okay, so we've got modals, we've got questioning.
Modals.
Must and have to. Okay. So what I would present students with next is this, the restricted use, and it would be a gap fill. I would say I wouldn't give them any clues about what I want them to fill, but I would say any appropriate words or phrases. So things like it is modals, it's modals of advice and must and have to, so obligation. And if the students are quite bright, they will start filling in with you really must visit the Guggenheim Museum. I think you should go to the new, or you should eat at the new Indian restaurants. If they're not so sure, they might come up with something else. But you're monitoring as a teacher, and you're seeing who is on track and who isn't. So that's moving from the situational approach to finding out what the students know already. Then, yes, then it goes away. I say, put your worksheets under your chair. We're going to learn the grammar, and then we're going to come back to these. And the way I would learn the grammar here, I'm not going to leave this up so that you can read it all, but this is another guided discovery activity. On
Everything
the left,
in
you see
in the handout as usual.
Questions if you were coming to visit me, and some rules for how we use must, have to, mustn't, don't have to, should, and ought to. So it's I'm trying to give rules for things that they are familiar with, must and have to, and also trying to give a bit extra for ought to. And I'm also trying to clarify that don't have to is not the same as mustn't.
Yeah, a really important point, particularly for Italian students. It's very common that they'll use these interchangeably, whereas it's very important that they should know they're different, because it really can cause problems.
I think that's perfectly understandable, because have to and must are the same, and then
definitely, yeah,
turn them negative. I totally sympathize whenever someone gets that wrong. Okay, and so this will be in your handouts, and it's another example of a guided discovery activity. So I've gone in a sort of V shape from authentic use to restricted use to teaching. Now I'm going to do the same, but in reverse. So if you remember those worksheets, I would say I would give them the chance to change how they complete it, because now they know what I'm teaching. They're going to just have a little correction of all of these sentences. So if they say this cake is delicious, you absolutely should try it. That's not what I'm looking for. I'm looking for emphatic advice. You absolutely have to try it, or you absolutely must try it. Those kinds of things, and then you give them a bit of correction. Now, then we expand further to authentic use again. This time, it's a very similar discussion, but they will now be using the modal verbs correctly if they've absorbed the lesson. So it's going from situational approach to guided discovery and then back out. Oh, how long does such a lesson usually take? This was planned for an hour, and it was almost exactly that. There was enough time for pronunciation as well.
I think this is, again, sort of like the situation approach. It really shows to the student not just that they've learned a structure, but now that they can do something that they couldn't do before. You've demonstrated to them, it was hard to do this thing at the beginning. You've demonstrated to them that when they did it first, it wasn't perfect. You've given them the grammar. they've learned how to do it in the exercise, and now you're broadening it out, and they should, at the end of the lesson, be able to do it. And now, if they want to give advice to people, then they can do it. And so it gives a real sense of satisfaction, motivation.
Okay. And I have a quick bonus question. Looking at the photos, which European city did I originally teach this lesson in?
Not London.
Wasn't London, no.
Because you can see blue sky there, so it can't be London.
The places are Las Setas. Thank you, Sevilla. Lovely. Okay, I used to live near there. Okay, so we are going to rush through the conclusions, I'm afraid, because we're over time. So go.
Okay, yeah, these, just to point out that we're not necessarily saying that you need to use one or the other, okay? These are not necessarily better, but they may be more appropriate for some grammar points, or even if you just like to use a bit of variety.
Yeah, and as Josh mentioned, all of these approaches are not just for grammar. They can be adapted for vocabulary and pronunciation. And we may be using them in these ways already.
One of the things about the situational approach is you need to be quite tolerant of errors. Okay, you need, and also this sort of last approach that Sean was talking about, that you need to be tolerant of the errors. And this is not always easy, because it's sometimes if we've taught a structure and now we expect them to know it, it can be annoying if they're still making errors. It can be reflecting on our teaching. However, here we really have to demonstrate to the students that you're missing this grammar. And so you need to be a bit tolerant, because they need to know that they're not punished for not knowing it at the beginning of the lesson.
Yes.
Or at the end.
Wonderful,
punished
a wonderful quotation by one of my old bosses was, "A mistake is a gift to the class." Because that's it's something that's, oh yes, I can teach that, I can correct you, and every student benefits from that. And something to make in point to make in guided discovery. So the grammar explanations and the form and the use are still there, but it gives students a chance to deduce what they are through examples rather than just having them presented in a big flash. And hopefully this makes them more memorable and easier to understand. And so noticing activities, I put them there because they're not necessarily always about grammar, but they're useful to put in class because they give you little bits of grammar and vocabulary that you may not always be teaching if you're sticking to a course book. And they use deconstruction, reformulation, and translation, including Google Translate, which I'm sure that all of your students are using anyway, so this can be an opportunity for them to bring it into the class. Finally, an ARC lesson, which is just a fancy name for a structured test-teach-test, which shows how much students actually produce a given grammar point, even though they think they know it, and then make sure that by the end of the lesson, they are using it, no matter where they started. And as I said, it can use a selection of the approaches and activities we talked about today. Finally, it's most useful for learners who are struggling to progress. From what I just said, they know the grammar rules, but they don't actually use the grammar. We're moving it from inside their heads to outside. So yes, we were a bit over time. I hope you can forgive us for that. We still are after your suggestions. If you have any ideas for future webinars, then please write them in the chat as fast as you can.
Even if you like, you can even email them to Formality, okay, which will come to Sean and I, okay. But anyway, just to repeat the fact that email us at formazione@mlaworld.com if you have any problems with receiving the materials or the certificate, okay. Okay, we've got some ideas here, okay.
I'd love a pronunciation one.
Yep. Yeah, we're looking at, we are taking some on board. We already did a couple of ideas. Okay. Also, yeah, please remember that coming soon, you'll have some information about how you can watch these again if you like to, or even if you miss one, they are a webinar. You can you will be able to access them on the MLA website, okay, by logging in. Okay. Next week, sorry, in 2 weeks, I beg your pardon, we should be talking about teaching writing, some things to get your students writing, particularly useful for B1 and B2 Cambridge exams, the preliminary and the first, but useful for any lessons you want. Okay, some great ideas about how to correct writing, how to get students to correct other students' writing, and particularly the things that they're looking for in these exams. Yeah. Okay.
I think in writing as well, a lot of students I've noticed they simply write until the word count is finished, and they don't pay much attention to content. So one of the things that I really want to do is talk about encouraging them to plan, even if it's just 5 minutes in an exam situation.
Yeah, that's what we'll be looking at. Okay. Yeah. Thanks everyone for your participation, and I hope to see you again in 2 weeks. Okay.
Yes, thank you very much, everybody, and have a very good evening.
Okay. Bye-bye.